everyone can be an oral historian. You don't need to be a trained, university educated oral historian. And the stories don't have to be pulled out of an archive from a box. You don't have to go through the bureaucracy. Everyone has a story. They're free and they can be shared. And as long as you're willing to listen, you can be an oral historian. That's the simple kind of explanation. There are lots of extenuating circumstances and things to consider, like ethics, informed consent, the do's and don'ts of oral history. But I think that if we start from this, average, ordinary, everyday kind of premise that everyone has a story, and if we're willing to listen, that's how we can take oral history to the next level in terms of really giving people a voice in the community and allowing them to bring those voices alive. Well, I think that, we're lucky to be in Winnipeg that has an oral history center. We're lucky to be in Montreal if we have an oral history center, but lots of places don't. And so there's a lot of guidelines through the U.S. Oral History Association, through the center websites in Canada. And, I would recommend that most people get some training in it. We offer workshops. OHC here offers workshops. But if you can't, I really recommend that people read the guidelines. And certainly we're stressing worst case scenarios, and we go in training people to be attentive to worst case scenarios. I was involved in the Montreal Life Stories project, which interviewed over 500 people that came to Montreal who were displaced by war, genocide, other mass human rights violations. And the biggest concern from students that we were training was that, oh my God, what if in talking about these stories, we re-traumatize people? And certainly, we had all of those really important conversations, but the one thing to remember is that these people are resilient. They've survived. It's 60 or 70 years later in some cases with Holocaust survivors, not so long in terms of Rwandan and Cambodian survivors. But, we had a lot of psychological and ethical support put into place in that particular project because of the difficult nature of the stories. But nothing bad really happened because we planned for all of the worst case scenarios, right? So I think it's important to talk about all of that, but just on a very basic level, really start to understand what the ethical responsibilities are of an oral historian before you go into a room, right? What you should do at the very least is drop a kind of agreement between you and your interviewee, and this is the best way to collaborate, right? And to really show that you're respecting their wishes, and that agreement should state stuff like, if you feel uncomfortable at any time, we can stop the interview. If if I go home and you feel uncomfortable tonight about what you've told me, we can destroy the material. This whole notion that they have the right to withdraw at any moment and that we don't own their stories, they're their stories and we're just working with them. And so we have to have those kinds of agreements in place. I often tell my students that it's like being a doctor. We take different oaths, right? And we have this notion that our job is to do no harm. And so we have to work very hard to do that. But, I think it's important to reach out to these centers and these other places because there's a lot of people on board that will help you get through and plan your projects. Think about it as going in and not being like this planned, really rigid setting. Think about it as being this place where you can have this amazing conversation about the past, right? And you don't have to have it over an hour. You can have it over a couple of days. You can build a relationship over a couple of years. The conversation doesn't necessarily have to stop. We always say that we should allow the interviewee or the narrator, as we call them, to set the tone. So, I always say, wherever you feel most comfortable, I'll come to you. If you don't want to talk to me about this in your own home, we'll set up a place at in like a studio like this at Concordia or wherever you are. You can meet. I don't recommend meeting in a cafe where there's a great espresso machine going in the background because it will really affect your sound. Or in a loud, noisy restaurant. It's not ideal. Most of the time, people are all too happy to bring you into their home and entertain you. Make sure that they're comfortable. Make sure that they're sitting, in their favorite recliner. And in creating that comfortable space, you create a space where people are going to be willing to share. And, they might not go very deep on your first interaction with them, but certainly it will go a long way towards building that trust you need to ask people, tell me about your earliest experiences. If you were put on the spot and asked to tell me about your life, it would be a very jarring experience, right? So you want to really ease into that and make sure that the person's as comfortable as possible. the way I see oral history is that it's the co-creation of a source. So unlike going to the archive where we're pulling out those documents, right, those dusty documents, we're actually, sitting down together with tea or, and biscuits, and we're engaging in a conversation, we're sharing past experiences, and we're telling stories. And that's the kind of simple kind of premise behind oral history. That's the most powerful thing about oral history, is that you're making history with another person, right? And you're creating the source that's going to live on beyond you. And that's the most amazing part, so.